This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This episode is brought to you by the team at Lechuza, suppliers of self-watering pots and planters. Lechuza brings decades of experience in state-of-the-art precision manufacturing to bear on its stylish high-functionality range of planters. All Lechuza products are designed in-house and manufactured in the same factory as the iconic Playmobil toys. The complete collection comes in a wide variety of traditional and trend-led colours and shapes, and they're highly reliable for use both indoors and outdoors. The integrated soil irrigation system ensures that the plant receives the perfect amount of water for optimal growth. Thanks to a reservoir that always holds enough water and is controlled by a water level indicator, dried out or overwatered root bowels are a thing of the past. Find out more by visiting lechuza.co.uk. This week I thought it would be good to get an overview of the horticultural industry, so I'm speaking to the person with their finger on the pulse, Matthew Appleby, editor of Horticulture Week and host of the Horticulture Week podcast. We cover the effect of Brexit, plant passports and the pandemic on plant supplies and how this has affected consumers. Find out how the industry is faring given supply issues and the uptick in the interest in gardening. Matthew talks about whether consumers need to adjust their expectations and their way of gardening, and we end on how the push to go peat-free is affecting gardeners and the trade too. I started by asking Matthew if the industry was being impacted by Brexit.
Yeah, I think it is. I've been talking to people really recently, just individuals who want to bring in plants for their collections, and they say it's, the post-Brexit plant import system's causing them huge headaches because they can't bring in plants because, the cost is so high. If you want to bring in cuttings from the EU, it's 183 quid for an inspection now. So you're not going to bring in a cactus if you, collect cactus, for instance. And, all those hikes have been delayed, but they're now all coming in. And, they're talking about exorbitant fees and about how they want a fairer system. And, talking to some of the sort of expert commentators in this, they reckon that, some tender greenhouse plants will go out of circulation because you can't bring in that stock from Europe very easily. Scarce plants come in for individual collectors from eBay, that type of stuff. They don't come in from nurseries and garden centres. I know the RHS recently put out some advice saying only buy from reputable nurseries and garden centres. Well, I think that's a bit naive because that's not how people buy now. They buy online, and it might be a specialist online seller, and it doesn't mean to say they're disreputable. One outcome, it could mean that, a collection of plants by someone like Plant Heritage could become more important because, individuals can't bring in unusual plants very easily anymore.
Yeah, and that makes me kind of wonder, are we going to see, like you said, a narrowing of plant choice? And also, will we see the market cornered by maybe those importers who can afford to pay those kind of fees because they'll just absorb it in the cost price and the volume that they sell?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to Sue Beasley from Bluebell Cottage Gardens and Nursery, and she was talking about how cuttings cost 180 odd quid to bring in for inspections, but a finished plant only costs 18 quid. And she said this is counterproductive for the UK growing industry because it means that if you want to import plants, it's not actually that expensive if they go straight out onto the shelf in the garden centre or whatever. But if you want to grow them on from cuttings, which is what most British growers do from imported cuttings, actually it's really expensive. So that would narrow the range because you're only going to bring in a load of the same thing and not like lots of individual things because, it's just so much more complicated than expensive. So, effect of this is to reduce the incentives to grow our own in the UK using plugs and starters stock from the EU. And increases the incentive to buying finished stock, which, some of these people are saying is illogical. And it's kind of not what Brexit was designed to do.
Also, obviously there was Brexit, but we've also had the pandemic. Has that had any effect on plant supplies and material supplies?
Well, the big effect of the pandemic is a massive increase in demand. I was in B&Q this week and they hardly had any veg plants. So if you wanted to buy a courgette plant from B&Q, you couldn't. And I think, because earlier this season was cold and wet, if you planted your courgettes when you should have done, they probably haven't grown. So you might want to buy a plant which has grown on a bit. And, if you're an average B&Q punter, that's going to be pretty difficult. So that sort of supply and demand thing has got really tough because there's so many new gardeners in the market. But I mean, obviously that's a really good thing. And that's happened across a range of type of plants. They're a bit harder to get, particularly earlier in the season. I think things have eased a bit now, but it does mean that what basically has happened over the last year is British production hasn't really gone up much, and it couldn't go up much because of lockdowns last year and because of higher sales last year. So people have actually imported a bit more to fill that gap. Prices have probably gone up a bit because of what I was talking about earlier on, like all this sort of extra sort of Brexit-related admin. But that leaves a big gap for British growers in the market. They can fill that gap. And I'm talking to a few growers who are looking to expand production and are already doing it because, that demand is now there. But how long it stays, people aren't that sure.
What you think maybe when we come out of lockdown fully, people will maybe not be so interested in their gardens or not have the time?
One thing is, I was talking to someone about houseplants the other day, and they were saying, when people go back to work in the office, which is kind of happening soon, we're meant to be going back in September 3 days a week, for instance. Why would you buy more houseplants from your home when you're at home less? But then again, you might have caught the bug and they just be really into buying houseplants and buy them all the time, or you might have even signed up to a subscription service, so you're getting them monthly or whatever. But the chances are you've got less time to spend at home and less time to garden. But it is going into the winter, so possibly not as important. And you might have started a load of projects in your garden, and you're really into it now, so, or taking on an allotment even. So there's definitely going to be more gardeners around for next year.
I noticed when we were in the first lockdown, there was a certain company, I won't mention their name, who was selling, I think it was tomato plants at some extortionate price, and they were obviously basically profiteering on the situation. I think that may have been a thing at the start of lockdowns. Have you noticed any of that going on, or do you think that's kind of stopping now?
I think prices, during the first lockdown, you could sell anything. Like you could sell, if you had it and you put it on a website, you could sell it. Like people were selling seeds, packet seeds, for more than the price on the back of the packet of seeds, because people were just going crazy, weren't they? I remember, flour and all that type of stuff. It was all a bit nuts. I mean, it's settled back down a bit now, but I think, in a lot of areas, kind of a new normal is a higher price. But I mean, the main thing about a new normal is it's just harder to do anything, isn't it? It's like not anything spontaneous, booking tickets, it's just all a bit more expensive and a bit more difficult.
Yeah. And what about the hard landscaping side of the industry, the building and construction guys? Have you noticed any trends with that? Personally, I've seen problems with supplies and kind of long customer waiting lists. Have you observed that as well?
Yeah, well, there's more worldwide demand. There's difficulties getting product from China, for instance, the Suez Canal. There's loads of house building going on. So for anything from sort of cement to timber to almost anything, it's more difficult to get and more expensive. So yeah, I mean, that is a problem. And, you hear every now and again of something that is just not available, hard to get. I mean, garden furniture is a big issue, for the garden retail trade, because traditionally this time of year, that would be the big sort of cash cow. It's pretty profitable. It's pretty high ticket. It's summer. People buy it now, but in fact, they bought it a few months ago because they had their garden parties because that's all you could do. And it kind of ran out. And it's hard, there's obviously issues in China, and there's issues with Suez Canal, and there's massive issues in terms of freight, which has gone up many, many times in cost. So getting hold of garden furniture now for something like, you want to have a bit of a garden party around the Euros football is pretty tricky. Like, people have got it on pre-order and they might not have got it yet. That's one particular garden related issue, but it goes across the board with any kind of hard goods.
I was thinking as well about because everybody had more time, I wondered if you'd noticed people who are working in maybe the garden maintenance or garden design industries. Do you think they took a hit or will continue to take a hit if they have moving forwards, because people are tending to do it themselves and educate themselves and just get out there and have a go?
No, I don't think so. I think every garden designer and landscaper I've spoken to has said they've never been busier, because during lockdown, people thought, well, I'll get my garden done, and I think that's continuing. People were sitting there in their house looking at the garden thinking, let's get it done. I think there's been a bit of a boom in that.
Well, that's good. So there are some positive effects down the line. And you mentioned that some nurseries are expanding to growing more plants themselves in this country. Do you think there'll be an emergence of new growers and nurseries on the scene as well?
Possibly. I mean, I think smaller growers like niche. I mean, that's pretty pushed pretty hard by TV people like Monty Don. Like, they obviously don't like big commercial growers, but I think big commercial growers, there's a fragile confidence there. Like, they'd like to expand. They probably haven't quite got the money, though they probably have earned money in the last year. Looking at the figures, a lot of them have been more profitable in the last year because of, they've furloughed people, they've had various bits of government support, and sales were higher than they expected. So they might have some money to invest to grow. I was talking to a UK orchid grower the other day, and he said, we're not going to expand, we're just going to fill our glass houses more. And he said, one thing we're going to do is we're going to grow smaller plants, because everyone's into sort of compact. So he'll grow more smaller plants, and he'll have more available. I mean, orchids have traditionally been imported. And he said, the foliage houseplant market is massively expanding, so we're going to start getting into that, and that's never been available in the UK before. But I think in niche products, there's absolutely huge opportunities. Like, I've done loads on peat-free. You can't get peat-free houseplants. You can't get peat-free veg plants. You can't get peat-free plants in general very easily. So, that's one niche which, is just going to expand massively. And this sort of homegrown thing, the people want to buy homegrown, there's opportunities there, and demand this spring kind of showed that.
Yeah. And how about the way that people are buying? Is that, has that moved very much online?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the figures, and you're looking at someone like Thomson & Morgan, which bought Sutton's quite recently, and that's sort of 80 million. You get U-Garden, that's getting, it's 50 million plus. You're looking at Hayloft, which was 12.5 million. I mean, all these companies were way smaller beforehand. Things have moved on 5 years in a year. I mean, it's slowed down now in the last couple of months. Looking at this figures I'm getting from Capgemini, which sort of analyzes the market, but that's against last year when it was already up massively. I mean, I mean, if you were an online garden seller last year, basically if you didn't make loads and loads of money, you were doing something very wrong, because they all did, and they've all expanded massively, and there's a lot of kind of big business circling around them now, thinking, we will buy these online companies, or they haven't already done so. Yeah, I mean, online gardening, buying online gardening now is kind of a norm, whereas in the past it kind of wasn't.
And have you heard anything about kind of delivery issues? I have seen some things anecdotally online where people have had plants turn up, but then maybe not great. Have we kind of nailed that yet?
I think people have invested quite a bit in their back office IT systems, delivery systems. I mean, last year there were massive issues. Like, I was even on the radio about it, and I was talking to some of the suppliers like Garden Express, who had sort of big problems because they were just kind of expanding like a rate which there's no way they could have predicted. They were just getting absolutely bombarded with orders. But, I think they're a bit more prepared this year, and I've heard a lot less. Though people do contact me quite regularly complaining about companies saying, can you sort it out? And I'm like, probably not, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah, you're like the horticultural version of, is it you and yours?
Watchdog.
Yeah, watchdog. Yeah.
People sometimes, particularly last year, at the wit's end, because the customer service departments of these companies broke down, and they were just sort of reaching out to anybody looking for a bit of advice when they weren't getting their deliveries, or they were getting deliveries of stuff which wasn't that great. But I've heard a lot less of that this year.
Yeah, well, that's good. I know there were some issues, but that is really crucial, isn't it? If we're going to go online selling plants, we need to be able to get them to the end location safely. But you did mention peat-free, which I know has caused a bit of a stir in various places. How is that going in the industry as a whole? And, is it causing problems, and do you think we can sort them?
No, I'm glad you asked me that, Sarah, because that's my favourite subject. And I've been banging on about it for years and years. Not particularly saying, let's all go peat-free, peat is terrible. I'm just really interested in the issue as a political issue. And, I see a lot of the campaigners who are kind of like, just sort of go nuts about it. But to me, the campaigning has not been too subtle, but things have reached a tipping point now, and the government has got a consultation coming out this summer where basically it's going to ban it by 2024, which I was lucky enough to report first last month. And this is going to be led by DIYs and supermarkets, not garden centres or anybody else. And what's happening now is this in April, Co-op said it was going peat-free. Waitrose, I can announce, is going peat-free, which, well, they're going to announce it, but that's but in terms of bagged growing media, I'm talking. B&Q is going to do it from 2023, and this is all because the government says it's going by 2024. And then everyone will follow suit. So it's led by supermarkets and big DIYs, and then the garden centres and everyone else will follow suit. But then the next step is the growers have to go there. And, that won't happen until towards the end of the decade, and that will be a bit more of an issue because of getting the raw materials and all that. But yeah, I mean, that is an issue I've been reporting on for nearly 20 years, and I reckon I've reported more on peat-free than anybody else ever. Been really, really boring about it. I've been sort of criticised by both sides about it, which means I must be doing a good job.
Definitely. I mean, what has brought it to such a head? Because it seemed as if the government did not want to get off the fence on it at all. What's caused the decision?
Well, it's carbon, isn't it? And climate change and carbon targets. And that's basically it. They've realised that, digging up peat is bad news, got some figures on it. And in the past, people have talked about habitat and nature and wildlife and, but it's the carbon issue. I think it's really well recognized now and everybody understands it, and in every article I see, there's a big long explainer on it. But I reckon people understand that carbon issue, and they understand that, digging up the bogs is not good. And even people who dig up the bogs understand that's not good.
I mean, I'm hoping that by the time it comes around to being phased out for growers, they're going to have a contingency plan in place. But can you foresee any problems? Because I know, for example, this year, getting hold of peat-free compost in any kind of volume was very, very difficult.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the sort of standard reply from the industry, that there isn't enough other products available. And I mean, just though I was going on about before, if you're an online seller, you'll have done well. If you're selling anything that's not got peat in it as a growing media, you're going to do brilliantly, because people are kind of desperate to get hold of stuff at the moment. And yeah, there will be shortages because there won't be enough raw materials and enough production, and there will be price rises. Like, I was going through a load of websites today, and people talk about price matching peat and peat-free bagged media, but it kind of doesn't happen. And it's the same up the line in bulk volumes for growers. So they're really conscious on price, but they're obviously really conscious on quality as well, which is a big issue, because if their plants look a bit wrong, then they're going to get rejected. But it's going to be the supermarkets and the DIYs who write it into contracts that they want it peat-free. So it'll come from them first. But they also write in quality standards, which might not be there from smaller retailers. So they're going to have to, somehow manage to grow in a new medium, which is different from what they've been using for 50 years, and hit the same quality.
Yeah, and I know for a fact that we had some issues with the compost that was contaminated, that was peat-free. And because I think it was in such short supply, it happened last year. And then when we went to reorder, we said, can you guarantee this isn't going to happen again? And they said, no, we can't. And we said, well, will we be compensated if there is a problem? And they said, no, you won't unless you're a commercial grower. So, even that, they've kind of, if you want to buy peat free and it's in short supply, they really dictate the terms, and they can say to you, yeah, fine. Well, we don't care if you're a big, charity that's using this compost and our compost actually kills all your plants. We, there's nothing you can do about it. We're not going to do anything about it. So basically get on with it. So I do think maybe we've got a bit of a way to go.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, the big growers, they just want consistency, and peat gives them consistency. And an alternative growing media, it might not be the same every time. So that they just want to be able to kind of rely on it. But I think it'll all come, and it's all inevitable. And you're seeing people like the National Trust manage to find plants, but they don't sell house plants or veg plants, because they're just not available, and I've done some big national stories on that type of stuff. So yeah, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, there is actually. There are opportunities. And thinking about that, maybe, I know it's a bit crystal ball gazing, but moving forward, what do you think are the main opportunities for the horticultural industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, as we've talked about, import substitution, and just being greener, which may be peat-free, plastic free. When I see artificial turf as a bit of a new war ground, really, like, that's an easy thing for, an environmentalist to campaign against. So the government says it won't ban it or regulate against it, which we've reported on recently, but I can see big campaigns there, because obviously, you can't really argue that artificial turf's great for the environment in any way. Just sort of rewilding and just being a bit more rough around the edges, and how the industry fits in with that is a bit tricky. Like, if people are leaving wild patches, how do you sell against that? You can't sell lawnmowers against that. You can't really sell plants against that. You could probably sell a wildflower seed mix, but, what happens there? But I mean, grow your own's a big deal, and I think that that's going to run. Particularly, I think in the next year or two, when people are starting having to pay back all the sort of government pandemic money and taxes rise, and maybe the economy isn't so good. That's when grow your own, takes off again. I mean, it's already been massive during lockdown, but I think it'll rise again fairly soon.
Yeah, well, I think it will, because the prices in the supermarkets just seem to be going through the roof. So, that's one aspect, I would think. Cool. Well, before you go, could you just talk quickly about your podcast and tell people where they can find it?
Oh God, yeah, crikey, yeah. You take me by surprise now. We do a podcast at Hort Week, and it's sort of aimed at the industry, but it's free to access, and it's hortweek.com/podcasts, and we're doing them all the time. Like, I've just done one about Wimbledon tennis with the person who grows strawberries for them, Hugh Low Farms. Done one, I did one on artificial turf with the Lawn Care Association. I do one with growers, like people like Claire Austin, but big growers as well, like Johnson's and Wixley, and retailers like Glendoick Gardens. He interesting. Try and make them a bit more interested than just talking about trade stuff. Like Ken Cox talked a bit about his country music, his Americana, so I quite enjoy doing them. I've been inspired by you, Sarah.
Thank you, Matt, who, joking aside, has been a very great supporter of Roots and All, and I appreciate him coming back on the podcast, the first ever returning guest, I might add, and giving his expert opinion on the state of horticulture. Thanks to you as well for listening. Don't forget to visit lechuza.co.uk to find out more about their indoor and outdoor planters with their built-in irrigation system. I'll leave you with Dr. Ian Bedford, talking about aphids and why we should embrace them in our gardens.
As we head on towards spring, leaf buds start to break on plants throughout our gardens, triggering many different plant bugs to awaken from winter dormancy. Some of these bugs will be aphids, ubiquitous sap-sucking insects that rapidly reproduce to form large infestations. So their early appearance in the garden may cause concern and prompt the use of a chemical insecticide. But is that really the right thing to do, so soon after winter, when our garden's ecology is slowly but surely springing back into life? Over millions of years, aphids have become a vital food source for many other creatures, providing the foundation for numerous natural food chains to develop, that together create the complex food web that sustains a balanced ecosystem. However, aphids have also become plant pests, simply because they've managed to gain a survival advantage from our domestication of plants over the past 11,000 years. Our quest for ever better plants, selecting, breeding and cultivating them, has inadvertently produced many varieties that no longer have their natural plant defence genes, which has made life a lot easier for plant bugs such as aphids to feed and colonise these defenceless plants. In addition, vast areas of monoculture, the fast cycle from seed to harvest, and non-specific insecticides have all helped aphids to outcompete their natural enemies within field crops. Since ladybirds, hoverflies, lacewings and parasitic wasps, for example, reproduce at a much slower rate and rarely have a long enough period to effectively control aphid infestations. In our home gardens and allotments, though, we do have the opportunity to let the natural predators and parasites of aphids become established and to help the natural development of a balanced system. By not eradicating the aphids when they first appear, their numbers will rapidly increase. But rest assured, before long, insectivorous wildlife will find them, and we will start to see how nature works towards restoring a balance. The problem is that where insectivorous wildlife has become scarce, it'll need time to re-establish, and so a balanced natural system for controlling aphids could take many months or even years to become effective. So as those aphids begin infesting our garden plants, instead of regarding them as a problem that needs eradicating, perhaps we should try and accept them as that first vital component of a balanced garden ecosystem. And if their infestations do become intolerable, we use alternatives to chemical insecticides, perhaps knocking them back and slowing them down with water from a fine garden hose spray, whilst their predators and parasites get on with their work.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast